red-eye flight to Heathrow. I hopped in my rental car all the way to Andrew. Didn't think it was that far. And then back down to Rochester through sunshine, snow, and rain, making friends and finally putting faces to their names. And old Rosie kept me smiling. She didn't let me down. I was singing in the pubs, celebrating small towns.
Where are we?
Bolton, corn, Blackpool, fish, chips, and roast, cockles, curry, kidney pie, and the Alfred Eastern Coast. With the Travis morning sunshine is a memory all for me, and the ones I shared with beans on toast, Bob and Lizzie B. No Rosie kept us smiling, she didn't let us down. We were singing in the pubs, celebrating small towns. Well, I tried my hand at surfing, I tied a new key. I put my wetsuit on inside out, backwards on the beach. I took a roundabout the wrong way, on the wrong side of the road. I said I'd never been surfing and I ain't from here, and I'm pretty sure that it showed. No Rosie kept me smiling, she didn't let me down. I was singing in the pubs, celebrating small towns. Well, I'm just naming names of some places that I've been. Some I may return to, some I'll never see again. But there's one thing I can tell you, one thing that I do know, is that most of us are good at heart, no matter where you go. And old Rosie kept us smiling, she didn't let us down. We were singing in the pubs, celebrating small towns. And old Rosie kept us smiling, she didn't let us down. We were singing in the pubs, celebrating small, small town.
Hey, all right.
Thank you. We got time for like one more? Does that work for you? Two more? All right, I'm gonna play two more. Cool. Cheers, guys. What a wonderful night. It's Friday night. Yes, cheers. This is my mug from England. Well, English crab and lobster. But and happy Mother's Day weekend to all you mothers out there. It's supposed to freeze I don't know where everybody's from. I'm not assuming. I'm sure there's people all over the world, but here in Lawrence, it may freeze tonight, which is not exciting for our tomato plants. Play you this song. This is actually a song that my father wrote for my mother in 1976. Before I was born, a few years before I was born. So my father, he passed away actually shortly after we caught the epic lunker bass, and so I didn't get to know him too well. But when I was old enough to be trusted with some things of his, my mom gave me a big stack of art and poems he'd done and just kind of musings, and I found these lyrics in it and I really loved them, so I put a few chords to them, and this is what I came up with. It's a song called Sally. Sally, will you walk with me down a dusty country road. We'll take some time to smell the roses, as we did so long ago. And Sally, will you walk with me through an early springtime rain? We'll take a dip in Granddad's pond, race that northbound train. We'll run and laugh like kids again, as we did so long ago. And I'll tell you that I love you, as if you didn't know. Sally, will you walk with me? Sally, will you walk with me from now until the end of time? We're gonna find our own eternity and make our poem rhyme. Run and laugh like kids again, as we did so long ago. And I'll tell you that I love you, as if you didn't know, as if you didn't know, as if you didn't know, as if you didn't know. Well, Sally, just walk with me. Thank you.
Hey, all right.
All right, cool. I'm going to do one more. And thank you so much for listening. And I hope you guys, I'm going to stick around and watch as many stories as I can while wrangling the young child as we make dinner. So I don't want to be rude, but I may be in and out. And so thank you, Elizabeth, for inviting me. And I hope you guys have a great night and a great time doing this. And I suppose the only thing I can say is if you like what you hear on my website, skysmeed.com, I have music for sale and shirts and all kinds of stuff. And if you order anything, you get a free bumper sticker that says positivity will prevail. So very important. It's heavy, high quality stuff. NASA invented it, the material I'm using. I'll play you one more song. This is it's about a fellow from Ohio who goes to Colorado to get a prescription for marijuana. And I didn't know much about marijuana when I was writing this song, so I did some research on the internet, and this is what I came up with. It's actually, when I play it in front of people that are actually in the same room. It's a crowd participation song. So I'm gonna just depend on you guys. I'm gonna leave you on your own in your own space to participate with me. So early into the song, I'm gonna say all day, and you guys are gonna yell back all day, and then I'm gonna yell all night, and then you're gonna yell all night. Don't worry, I know you can do it. So here we go, a little story called Talking Medical Marijuana Blues. Here we go. Don't forget your lines. Well, I woke up in the morning and I didn't feel good. I had a hairy tongue and I couldn't get wood. My eyes were itchy and kinda red. I didn't want to do nothing but lay in bed all day,
all day,
all night,
all
and
night.
all morning. Well, my doctor said there was nothing to do. I probably just had me a case of the flu. So I left my home in Ohio for a second opinion in Colorado. You know, OG Kush, Northern Lights, and Afghani Goo. As soon as I crossed the Boulder line, I went to the very first doctor I could find. It was an ad in the back of the local paper called Medical Smoke and Healing Vapor. You get an incredible edible with your first visit. Well, the whole front lobby was filled with smoke and the nurse smelled like patchouli soap. She took me in for my height and weight and the whole time kept rambling about fate, reincarnation, alfalfa sprouts, and yoga. She had eagle feathers in her dreads and tie-dyed scrubs made of hemp thread. Well, I was just about to change my mind when through the door walked Dr. Kind. And he said, "Breathe deep. I want to listen to your soul." Well, he had a do-rag around his head and an old tank top that said Grateful Dead. Oh, he spun around and he sat on the floor and he asked me what I journeyed here for. I told him fatigue, chronic pain, and cottonmouth. Well, he stood on his head and he kicked off his shoes and he said, "Brother, I have some kick-ass news. Doctor's orders are to chill in a sauna, buy you a bong and smoke marijuana. And if symptoms persist for more than 10 days, try to understand it's only a phase, man." Well, he signed the script and he gave me a hug and he stopped in the doorway and he said, "One love, one heart, one life, peace." Thanks, guys. Have a great night. Bye.
Welcome to the Lawrence Arts Center Free State Story Slam Grand Slam event for the 2019-2020 season. My name is David Hollond, and I will be your host for the evening. So first thing is a number of thank yous. First of all, thank you to Smeed for providing tonight's amazing pre-story music. We appreciate all the musicians who have embellished our story slams with their live music during this season. And we especially thank Sky for doing it tonight on our virtual story slam. I also want to say thank you to the Lawrence Arts Center for always supporting this wonderful event. As I mentioned in the April event, the Free State Story Slam turned 10 years old a month ago. That was pretty exciting. But I also want to let everyone know that about the Lawrence Arts Center, that the Lawrence Arts Center is continuing virtual events and classes over the summer. So please check out the Lawrence Arts Center website to learn more, to take a class, or if you feel so inclined, to provide financial support for the Arts Center. I also want to say thanks to everyone for all of your contributions, stories, support, and attendance over the past 10 years, and especially during this 2019-2020 season, which has been a little bit different than usual. And then thank you all right now for spending time with us tonight and being willing to join us virtually during this stressful time that we are all enduring. And then finally, I want to say thank you to Elizabeth Sullivan and Jessica Ray at the Lawrence Arts Center for organizing this event and doing so much work to put everything together and to allow this to happen, and for doing all of the Zoom logistics. So thank you to the two of them. So I'm giving you a round of applause. So thank you. All right, so tonight we will have stories from 11 storytellers who were chosen host favorites over the course of the past season. Tonight's stories are not based on any theme, and they are new stories from our featured storytellers on any topic that they choose. In addition to these prepared stories, we may have time for an impromptu short story or two. If you get inspired throughout the course of tonight, just send a message letting us know in the group chat, and Jessica will pick that up, hopefully, or I'll pick it up and we'll figure this out. And if we have time, I'll call on one or two of you to tell an impromptu story. I do ask that you keep it short, 2 to 4 minutes. And with that, let's get started with the stories. Our first storyteller is Dan Hines. Dan spends his days as an attorney for Advisors Excel in Topeka, and many of his nights acting and directing in theater shows throughout Northeast Kansas. The best thing in those days and nights for Dan is his partner, Nicole Olson, who grew up performing at the Lawrence Arts Center. A week ago, Dan and Nicole adopted their first puppy, a 3-pound ball of Shih Tzu force named Trixie, who I think I just saw earlier on this Zoom. So we may see her again, I'm not so sure. But Dan is both excited to share the company of adults for a change, and must preemptively apologize if he falls asleep mid-story. Welcome Dan Hines and his story, Incubation.
Thank you, David. As I was preparing for this day and thinking about this time, I was thinking back actually to where I started 10 years ago, which was my first day of law school. Now, I was an unconventional student, and in that I had gone to college, taken a couple of years in the workforce, and then went back to law school. So I was feeling very uncool and very unsure how to fit in. But I was prepared. I'd done the required reading, which included a book by our professor, who was the professor who was greeting us that day, about the educational process, about giving us tips on not only what we should do, but how we should think about learning the material that we were going to be presented. Unfortunately, that day I was running just a hair late, and so I jumped into the line to pick up, the T-shirt and the packet of information and all that stuff, and then I make my way to the classroom. I'm so relieved that I see about midway down, because of course everybody took the back rows, about midway down there's a spot right on the end, nice, easy, just an open seat, and even an open seat next to it. So I don't have to worry about, am I going to encroach on somebody's territory? I got plenty of room. And then in walks Joan. To describe Joan could take this entire event, but the simplest thing I will tell you is, for those of you who are familiar with the TV show The Office, if you can think of about a 5'3" female Dwight Schrute, that's Joan. And she walked in carrying this massive bag of books in her hands, and also wearing a backpack, which it turns out was a Camelback full of water. Why she felt she needed that much hydration for 1 hour class, couldn't tell you. But of course, she sits in the open spot right next to me, sucking on that water until class begins. The professor opens by talking to us about expectations, about what it is that we should be prepared to do over the course of our law school time. He says law school is going to put an astonishing amount of information into your mind. But more than that, it's going to change the way you think. You will think like a lawyer, not the way you thought coming into law school. And he wanted us to think about that. And the way he described it was, we're going to put this information into you. You're going to incubate with it for about 3 years. And when you come out, you're going to be responsible for every piece of advice you ever give. And then the professor says, all right, so I want to talk about how we're going to learn this information. And I'm sure you've all read the book. And Joan shoots up. And she says, Professor, I need to interrupt you so that I can read you this quote from the poet Khalil Gibran. And she says, as Mr. Gibran says, no man can reveal you aught but that which already lies half asleep in the dawning of your knowledge. The teacher who walks in the shadow of the temple among his followers gives not of his wisdom, but rather of his faith and lovingness. If he is indeed wise, he does not bid you enter the house of his wisdom, but rather leads you to the threshold of your own mind. And the class is stunned. And I am mortified because I don't know any of these people, and I don't want any of these people to think that I know her. And the professor handles it very calmly. He says, well, I appreciate your contribution, but I think we're just going to go with my technique for a little while. And Joan says, well, no, professor, I don't think that's going to work. You can't teach people to learn. The professor must have seen my face because he turns to me and says, do you agree with that? No, sir. Why don't you agree with that? Well, sir, one, if we can't learn how to learn the same way we learn anything else, then I don't know how we learn anything else. And two, I don't think I want to start my law school career disagreeing with the expert. And the professor smiles and says, that's a good choice. Way to start thinking like a lawyer. And Joan sits down, just staring daggers at me. And I just shrug and I say, sorry. And the professor goes on with his day. Now, I never had another conversation with Joan. I don't actually know if she even graduated with me. I don't know what happened to her or where she ended up. But I do know that that professor taught me in 3 courses and gave me an opportunity to have the career that I wanted to have, which was just a tremendous bit of good fortune. And he always laughed about how that's the way that we met, was in dealing with Joan and her impertinence. So in this time where we're in a position to say, I'm going to do what I think is right, while there are others who yell at the experts and want to bring their own random information into the conversation, I just think back on it and say, you know what? I'm glad I stuck with the experts then, and I'm glad I'm sticking with the experts now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Thanks for the rather humorous story and also the life lesson. So story number 2 comes from Taylor Tappan. Taylor is originally from Brookings, South Dakota, but he calls Lawrence home. He's currently a PhD candidate in geography at KU, working to finish his dissertation on the environmental and social impacts of tropical deforestation in Costa Rica. His story tonight is entitled Misadventures and Type 3 Fun. Taylor?
Everybody,
you're up.
Well, thanks, David, and thanks to you all for being here. Yeah, like David said, my talk is entitled Misadventures and Type 3 Fun. So recently, I learned that there are exactly 3 categories of fun. The first is Type 1, and it most likely conforms to how each and every one of you would define fun individually. For me, Type 1 fun might include playing low-stakes softball in Lawrence's Municipal Rec League, or stealing into the kitchen after midnight when my wife is asleep to get seconds on ice cream, or just being here with you all. No matter what, I know I'm going to have a great time with Type 1 fun. Type 2 fun adds both a Roman numeral to Type 1, but also a layer of complexity. Type 2 fun is not fun in the moment, but rather improves with hindsight. You might realize you've experienced Type 2 fun after watching a thrilling horror movie like Parasite, or after completing a marathon, or even after spending months in quarantine with your in-laws, the likes of whom you thought back in March would only be staying the weekend. But in the grand scheme of things, the universe cares not about the quibbles and spars among in-laws, and it keeps unfolding as it should, such that one day you'll actually miss the camaraderie you developed binge watching Tiger King with your spouse's parents. The third category of fun, and you can probably see where I'm headed with this, is called type 3. We can define type 3 fun as no fun whatsoever under any circumstances. Examples of type 3 fun might include root canals, colonoscopies, Mitch McConnell, or hurricanes. So now that we've established a common understanding for the three types of fun, I'll move on to my own experiences with type 3. Naturally, this narrative draws upon a misadventure from my recent honeymoon. My wife, Sylvia, and I were beginning our last days on Bali, a volcanic island in central Indonesia, wedged between Java to the west and Lombok to the east. I had pined to visit Bali since I was like 10 years old, long before Julia Roberts made it cool to go there and eat, pray, love. Ever since I had heard Balinese musical storytelling, combining the hypnotic flute with the mystical gamelan instruments, I had suffered a nostalgia to visit this magical realm. And not to uncover my own inner spiritual being, but rather because I just wanted to see Indonesia and meet the people who live there. So Sylvia and I got married and we went, along with droves of Instagrammers, yogis, and beachgoers from around the world who had the same idea. Bali as a tourist destination has been discovered. But we did our best to avoid the crowds, to get lost in its rugged landscapes of rice terraces and coffee plantations, ubiquitously dotted by Hindu temples adorned with dragons, breathing wisps of aromatic jasmine incense. The island's towering volcanoes tip the horizontal plane of our existence in Kansas on its end. And we soon discovered that the best way to see the island was to arrange our own transportation by renting a moped directly from our Airbnb host for a daily premium of about 50,000 Indonesian rupees, or $3.50, plus a fourth dollar to fill up the tank at a roadside sort of crank and wheel petroleum dispenser. We adjusted to driving on the left and to the assumption that stop signs or driving lanes were merely suggested safety conventions. During the trip, our dependence upon our 150cc orange hog, sort of pictured here, grew, and it became part of our identity. And we rode with confidence and became well-versed in using the horn as locals do. 2 beeps to bid someone a pleasant journey, 3 beeps to say, hey, coming up on your right, or no beeps at all if you're just not feeling chatty. Every so often, we would scoot by a house with dozens of empty wicker baskets strewn about, and 100 or more mopeds parked nearby, but without a soul in sight. And we would know that one of Bali's defining pastimes, a friendly neighborhood cockfight, was in session. In moments like these, I felt like a Balinese Che Guevara, and we were here to liberate these gladiator roosters from their wicker cages of oppression. Or maybe just to grab a simple lunch of steamed vegetables, peanut sauce, and special Balinese coffee harvested from the droppings of the cat-like civet animal. As our confidence on this orange beast crescendoed, so too did our sightseeing ambition and our radius of mobility. On our last day, we identified Bali's iconic Danu Baratan temple as our final destination. The temple floats on its own tiny archipelago of islets in a volcanic lake in central Bali, and it was featured on the cover of our Lonely Planet guidebook. Nothing stood in our way, except for maybe a 140-mile round-trip jaunt on the moped. A considerable distance, granted, but just yesterday, our 50-mile scavenger hunt for another temple had been a thrilling success. So at daybreak, we set out from the coastal village of Ahmed in eastern Bali, electing to traverse a northwesterly arc of the coastal highway that circumnavigates Bali before eventually turning inland toward the centrally located Baratan Temple. We expected to be on the road 3 hours each way. After an hour on the well-maintained coastal highway, a bit of convectional rainfall began to spit on us. We donned our rain jackets and checked the map and realized we were making good time, but we also noticed we were approaching a lightly transited inland road of great scenic potential that, according to the map, wouldn't add any mileage to our itinerary. So we made a left turn inland and began ascending the winding road through lush terrace rice fields and serene villages. As we ascended, the suffocating heat and humidity from the coast abated into a pleasant coolness. We continued climbing. Soon a light mist set in, but nothing to impede our progress. We drove on with resolve. The sinuous road, though, ascended subtly, and soon we had climbed 3,000 feet from sea level. A chill set in. The mist turned to rain, the clouds to fog. We pressed on and purchased petrol from a roadside vendor in a sleepy village. As we continued, a steady wind began to whip, and rain began to fall with reckless abandon. We were dressed in shorts and sandals from the waist down. From the waist up, our rain jackets betrayed their initial purpose, doing more to hold water in than the contrary. We drove through another sleepy town, pulling off under an awning to check our map. Two young men were also taking shelter under the awning and seemed conspicuously perplexed to see us. One of them asked with a smile in broken English, "Where do you go?" We replied, "Beraten." With a sweeping gesture of his arm, the man pointed onward, and before they both doubled over in laughter as we sped off into the rain. By now, we had repented our quixotic inclination for the inland detour, but we were already halfway. Meanwhile, our devious highway continued its ascent of Mount Batur's volcanic slopes. We soon reached a three-way intersection at a peak elevation of 5,500 feet. We had come up from sea level. From here, every road led downward. We were cold and wet to the bone, and we were being beaten by strong gusts of wind that made handling the moped really difficult, but there was no place to pull over. The fog was so thick that I had better vision of the road without my glasses. My wife, Sylvia, was silent and shaking with chills. I no longer felt like Che Guevara, but rather like Luke Skywalker trying to navigate a lone X-wing through an asteroid belt. There was no denying our predicament. The Sith had hit the fan. We made a right turn onto a busier road and began a precipitous descent, relieved to be heading down Mount Batur's inland slopes, but now confronting a new element of real danger. We were amidst a parade of dump trucks hauling construction materials up and down our new switchback road, in the fog, in the rain, with a near vertical drop and no shoulder on the outside curves and a sheer rock face on the inside tangents. If in the miles leading up to this moment we had been experiencing type 2 fun, we were now waist deep in type 3 fun. In what seemed like an eternity, we managed to coax the orange toy motorcycle down the mountain, out of the fog, and soon enough, out of the rain. We stopped for a breather at one of Central Bali's countless scenic overlooks. But as we pulled onto the shoulder, we hadn't noticed the troop of macaque monkeys admiring the same view. Indeed, I pulled up right next to an alpha male. He took offense to our sudden appearance on the bike, and double offense when we compounded our mistake by looking him in the eye. He bared his fangs and grabbed Sylvia's leg as she attempted a dismount. I struggled to hold the bike upright as she remounted, and we scrambled to make a getaway. Another hour went by before we finally arrived, wet, cold, and hungry, at our Temple of Solace, 6 hours after we departed the tranquil waters of Ahmed. In a fitting end to a day of type 3 fun, the temple was overrun with tourists and resembled more an amusement park than a place to ease the mind. Hawkers were selling t-shirts and figurines undoubtedly imported from China, while motorboats sped along, offering paying visitors more exclusive angles from which to photograph themselves with the temple. We ate lunch, or whatever meal we were entitled to at that hour, snapped a few uninspired photographs, and took the coastal road home. 4 months ago today marks this fateful journey of ours. The type 3 fun on our final day with the orange bike left us with a tinge of disillusion and a sudden yearning to come home after what had been a magical honeymoon in the weeks prior. Yet as I relate our type 3 misadventures to you today, a little introspection has helped me see a glimmer of humor in our circumstances, in the impulsive decision-making of two newlyweds who crossed a volcano in a rainstorm on an orange moped, dodging monkeys, chasing a mythical temple that turned out to be a lot of smoke and mirrors. And so, relative to the 3 categories of fun I provided to you at the onset, maybe it's time for me to take a step back and realize that by telling you this story, I'm enjoying it in hindsight. And thus it's rather type 2 fun in disguise. And for that, I owe all of you a debt of gratitude for listening to me and helping me shed new light on this misadventure. Thank you very much.
Taylor, thank you. I will say that hearing a story about travel in this current time when none of us are traveling makes me yearn very much for a time when I can travel again. So anyway, thank you for an awesome story.
Thank you very much.
I have some exciting news from Kansas Public Radio to share. A friend of the Art Center and amazing KPR radio host, Kay McIntyre, who I think is on this Story Slam, has a project that we think the Story Slam crowd is perfect for. KPR Presents has something called Quarantine Stories, Tell Us Your Story. And I'm going to read a little bit about it. How are you coping with the COVID pandemic? Whether you're sheltering at home or an essential worker, Kansas Public Radio wants to hear from you. KPR is collecting your self-recorded stories of living through this challenging time in partnership with the Kansas Historical Society, the Watkins Museum, the Lawrence Art Center, and the Lawrence Public Library. So search for Kansas Public Radio and Quarantine Stories on Google to learn more about it, or look for the link in this group chat on Zoom that I think just got posted. All right. So anyway, Kay, thank you for letting us all know about that. Moving on, storyteller number 3 is Rick Chandler. Rick wants you to know that he is the most boring man in the world. He doesn't drink beer of any type, and he's retired. Both very boring. He lives in the middle of the country, which apparently he feels is boring. He has been married forever, which didn't used to be boring. And he has 2 sons that still live with him, and he wishes that was more boring. His view is that if the least interesting man in the world can tell a story, then why aren't you telling us a great story to tell? And we'll tell it better than Rick with his boring delivery style, or so he believes. The least interesting man in the world with his story winning, which I am sure won't be boring.
So you can hear me? Great. So I walked into the Las Vegas airport, the Southwest terminal, and one thing that's great about when you go to Las Vegas, everybody's excited on the way out. There's noise, excitement. People are just hyped on, ready to go. And when you come back, it's very somber. Everybody's quiet. So the terminal was very somber, very quiet. I expected that. It wasn't new news. And then I saw Mills Lane. Mills Lane was the referee in boxing that did all the biggest fights. He was only 5'7" tall, 145 pounds. He was bald, but he had no problem controlling the fight between much bigger men who weighed 70 or 80 pounds more than him that could have torn him apart. And like a kid, I made a beeline to Mills and just started asking him questions. And he was so gracious. He exuded this confidence that frankly, I wish I had. I started asking him about his background, and he told me he had been a fighter in the Marines, had gone to law school, and he was now a district attorney in Reno. And later he would have his own TV show, one of those Judge Judy type shows. And I am just a kid listening to every word he has to say. And as I'm listening and enjoying every second of it, I can't believe I'm here. Not only am I talking to this guy, I've been to a fight the night before, the Mike Tyson fight. The company was paying for everything. The company I worked at was picking up the bill. And I should have been fired. 2.5 months earlier, I had been in Peter Leahy's office. Peter was our vice president of sales. He was charismatic, he was energetic, and he was a change maker. He was just the kind of guy who would go up to a murdering hornet's nest and give it a good swift kick. And he had picked me to lead a project to introduce a new type of product. And my primary role was to work with these outside consultants that would do most of the heavy lifting, but they were friends of Peter's. They were his close friends, and they were spending a lot of money. And I had been successful by finding problems and fixing them, and these guys were overlooking a lot of problems. So as I sat in Peter's office, I had to tell him, these guys were making some mistakes. And these problems weren't just small problems, they were big problems. And I was afraid this project was going to fail. Well, Peter listened. He asked a few questions, but not a whole lot. And I was pretty sure he was getting it. And just like that kid, he feels like he fits in. I started making little cracks, little wisecracks, got kind of flippant and sarcastic. And I went too far. I went way too far. Peter lost it. Here I had told him the people he had handpicked, his close friends, were failing, and now I was being flippant about it. He started screaming, literally screaming at the top of his lungs. We were in his office. No one else was there away. Because frankly, I should have been. You can't be a smart ass to your vice presidents. You got to respect the position, if nothing else. So for the next several months, I worked all the time. If this project failed, it wasn't going to be because I didn't do my part. I worked 7 days a week, all day, all night. And I could have used some marijuana to get through it because I was working my tail off. And Peter, I think, saw that because 2.5 months in, he came to me and said, hey, we have to work this weekend. We have to go out of town. Okay. My wife was already getting frustrated with all the work I was doing. But she said, I knew she'd be okay with it, but still, go out of town again on such short notice. And you could see the look of disappointment on my face, Peter could. And he said, I got you tickets to the Mike Tyson fight. Do you want to go? If you do, you have to leave in the next several hours. Just put that you're doing store checks on your expense report. We'll take care of everything. I couldn't believe it. I'd gone from being fired to going to a fight. I had been a boxer in high school and college. This was the greatest thing in the world. This was Mike Tyson's first fight after he came out of prison. This was the highest pay-per-view fight ever at that time. He was fighting a guy named Pete the Fighter. Pete McNeely was his name. And everybody went. We were several rows back. We weren't in the front row. But during the intermission, before the fight, hundreds of the celebrities, everybody from Hollywood was there. The place was packed. It was buzz. It was excitement, all to see Mike Tyson's return. Like I said, highest pay-per-view ever at the time. Well, 20 seconds into the fight, just like Mike Tyson always does, he hits Pete McNeely and down he goes. But it's not a bad hit. So Pete gets up and he's ready to fight again. Tyson hits him again about a minute later, 80 seconds into the fight. And this is a good hit. This is hard. McNeely gets up, but you can tell he's rocked. But he's ready to fight. He's ready to go. And his corner throws in the towel. McNeely's the fighter. His manager had said, enough is enough. He had thrown in the towel. Pete tried to push back, wanted to fight some more. The crowd wanted to fight some more, but the manager said no. And Mills Lane, the referee, the guy I was talking to, had to call the fight because that's the rules. If the manager throws in a towel, it's done. So I asked Mills, hey, what did you think of the fight last night? And he said the kid was a gamer, but the manager knew what winning was. Mills could tell I was perplexed. I know what winning is. You beat your opponent. Pete McNeely was never going to beat Mike Tyson. He was never going to outbox him. He wasn't strong enough. He wasn't tough enough. For Pete McNeely, winning was cashing the check, which was $400,000, not damaging his reputation, and not damaging his face or his internal organs. See, the manager knew what winning was. It wasn't long after that Mills' plane got called and he left. And I was left perplexed thinking, what was winning? I'm still not good about knowing what winning is, and I probably get in fights I probably shouldn't get into. But 3 years ago, I was in Dallas, and I called Peter Leahy to tell him I was in town. He said not only should we go to dinner, he invited me to his house. He graciously invited me to his home. And when we went to dinner, we asked about old friends, and he explained he didn't keep in touch with many people from that company, and certainly didn't keep in touch with those consultants that had led him down a bad path. As a matter of fact, he told me, "You're one of the few guys that keeps in touch, and I really appreciate it." And that's when I knew winning wasn't knowing that the project had failed, because it did, not just because of the reasons I said. There were other big problems. And it wasn't that I'd been pulled off of the project and put into a better job. No, winning was maintaining that friendship with Peter Leahy. And I had a lot of great friends at that company. And because of that, I look at that time and I know what winning was. Thanks.
Thank you, Rick, for the decidedly non-boring story. So right now, I just wanted to remind anyone who has come up with an impromptu short story that they want to tell to just type it into the group chat, and in a story or two, I'll if someone has one, I'll ask for that. If you're thinking about doing that, go ahead and send a little message in the group chat. All right, our next storyteller is John Kennedy, who is a professor in the Department of Political Science and also the director of the Center for East Asian Studies at the University of Kansas. He's from California, but he has lived in Lawrence since 2003. His first ever Story Slam performance was at the Lawrence Art Center in November 2019, and it was an awesome story, John. Anyway, tonight he's got a story called Chasing Freedom. John?
I'm in the middle of nowhere. I'm basically in a deserted rural road. There's just me and a few cows. I've been hitchhiking about most of the day. And I'm basically got dropped off in a place where I have no idea where I am. I have a relatively little idea about where I'm going and how I'm going to get there. But at that moment, my mind is completely clear. I feel like all the anxieties and concerns and worries that I had from past and the future were just kind of dissipating. I was completely in the moment, and I felt relaxed and completely at ease. And this idea, this kind of notion of what people have talked about, maybe nirvana or a Zen moment, but it was euphoric. Soon after, I started thinking about, when am I going to get that next ride? What's going to happen when I actually arrive or try to get to the place I'm going to? My mind raced with thoughts, and that moment passed. This adventure began the day before. I was having lunch, and I overheard some musicians talk about the Strawberry Bluegrass Festival. And I thought, hey, that sounds like a great place and a great event to go check out. So I decided I was going to go. It's August 1983. I'm 21 years old. I'm between places to live. The place I was just living at, I was living with 6 other people in a house, and the owner of the house very abruptly decided to sell it. So at the time, I was living in a VW bus parked in front of the cabinet shop where I was working at the time. My boss was about 55 years old, had long gray hair and a ponytail, and he was very laid back. He let me use the restroom during off hours. He had a shower, an open shower in the back of the shop that he let me use. So basically, when I told him, I'm going to go check out this festival for the next few days, his response was, far out, man. Good luck. So I got ready and I got started. Now, my VW bus was great to live in, but not for driving. It was missing one important component, an engine in the back. So I decided I was going to hitchhike there, which was basically the way I was getting around town by that time anyways. So I started off early the next morning, very early. And at the time, I've got shoulder-length hair. I'm wearing a tie-dye t-shirt, shorts, sandals. I've got a backpack, my acoustic guitar, and 2 bags of beef jerky, some bottled water, and $20 cash. I was on my way. I was living in a town called Nevada City, and I was trying to get to Strawberry, California. Well, Nevada City is in the foothills of the Sierra Nevadas. And in order to get to Strawberry, which was also in the foothills of the Sierra Nevadas, you had to take a 1-lane highway, out to the Central Valley, a freeway right at the edge of the Central Valley, go down south, then take some more country roads back into the Sierras in this giant U shape. So I start off, I get rides down to the main highway, and then I get rides, various number of rides, to where I end up in Strawberry at about 3 o'clock in that afternoon. The last ride was a lumber truck. And as we drove up to a crossroad with one stop sign, he said, "This is it." And I jumped out and I looked around. That's all I saw was one general store tucked in these giant pines. So I walk up to the general store, and as I'm walking, you can see that it's not just a general store. It's a grocery store, gas station, post office, pharmacy, cafe, and of course a bar. As I open the screen door that creaks, there's only 3 people in the room. They all quickly take a look at me and then basically ignore me. There's 2 old gentlemen at the end of the bar nursing beers, and a middle-aged woman behind the bar washing a glass. And I kind of raised my voice a little bit and said, "I'm here for the Strawberry Bluegrass Festival." The 2 guys at the end of the bar start kind of chuckling and elbowing each other. The woman puts the glass down. She says, "Oh, honey, you are out of luck this year." And she said, "The Strawberry Bluegrass Festival isn't held here anymore. Last year, or just this year, they moved it to Camp Mather right near Yosemite." I said, "Oh no." So I pulled out my map and I spread it out on the bar and I said, "Where do I go from here?" So she tells me I have to take, there's several rural roads that I can take to go back down to the freeway near the Central Valley, at the edge of the Central Valley, take that down south further, then cut back in to the Sierra Nevadas towards Yosemite, another giant U. So I stock up on provisions, what I can afford. I spend $3 on a small tub of peanut butter, a loaf of Wonder Bread, and a couple bottles of water. And I'm off. And about 20 minutes later, I get a ride, and I get basically, my ride lets me off somewhere between Strawberry and one of those main roads, the main freeway. And that's where I was walking for an hour, where I got that incredible euphoric feeling of freedom. And then after that dissipated, I was hoping to get a ride. About another 45 minutes later, I got a ride. 6 rides, and 9 hours later, I ended up at the front gate of Camp Mather. It's 1 a.m. I get out of the ride. The people who are that I got the ride from go in. I go to the man at the front gate, and I said, "How much are the tickets?" He says, "It's $20 a day, or you get a 3-day pass for $58. I was completely dumbfounded. I completely forgot and didn't think about the price of the tickets. And he can basically see on my face this, "What the hell am I going to do now?" look. And as I'm scheming in my mind, how am I going to figure out a way to sneak in by a campsite or a campground, around a campground? He looks at me and he offers me a job. He says, "Hey, I had a guy here who was going to be here from midnight to 8 in the morning and watch the front gate, but he never showed up. I'll tell you what, I'll pay you $25. I'll give you a free 3-day pass, and you can have all the sandwiches and water here that we have for the staff." And I said, "Okay." So basically somebody else was collecting money in the tickets, and I was just opening and closing the gates and checking wristbands. 8:30 the next morning, he shows up and he gives me $25. I get my free 3-day wristband. And then he basically gives me about 4 or 5 sandwiches I can take with me. I go in and it's a fantastic event. I had a remarkable time. I actually met some people I knew, and they offered me a ride back to Nevada City. It was just a fantastic trip all around. But when I really think about it, I don't remember the name of any band or even some of the people I jammed with at the campsite. The thing that stuck with me the most, that was with me and the deepest impression, was that feeling I had on the road. That euphoric feeling that I had just walking when nothing mattered, when I was just in that moment. And I spent the next 2 decades trying to find that moment, doing something intense and new, and then that calm kind of feeling of being in the moment at that time. Well, I thought I needed to get back on the road again to get there. I hitchhiked all across Northern California. Over the years, I went to different festivals. I moved around. I lived in the mountains for a while. I lived on the coast for a little bit. Then I went and lived in the Central Valley. And basically, I changed my job from being a carpenter to going to college. I even lived overseas for a couple of years. Although I got close a number of times, I even felt like I recaptured it once or twice. By the time I was in my 40s, I started settling down into more of a permanent job. Soon after, my daughter was born and house payments, and I basically gave up that search. However, when I was about 55 years old, this feeling started coming back to me in little unexpected ways. When I was basically in my office, or taking a walk around the neighborhood, or doing something new, like the feeling I get after teaching a brand new class, or that really great feeling I had after my first story slam at the Lawrence Art Center. When I recapture this moment, I think about that feeling I got when I was back on the road, but without leaving home. Thanks.
Thank you, John. So far, this story slam is making me want to go on an adventure and explore. So I have some news and information about the 2020-2021 season of the Free State Story Slam. As we usually do, Story Slam will be on hiatus over the summer, but we will return, I am happy to announce, in September as usual for the 2020-2021 season. That's really hard to say. We don't know if it will be in person or if it will be virtual events like this one, but look for Free State Story Slam to return in the fall. Sometime this summer, go to the Lawrence Art Center website and you'll be able to see the themes for the upcoming season. That hasn't been decided yet, but at some point in the next month or two, that will be, and it will be available on the website. All right, we'll move on to the next story. So Kel Pickens, also known as Cowboy Kel, the traveling slammer, has been known to flee back and forth across many state lines for all sorts of reasons, and storytelling at slams is but one of those. However, the traveling slammer has not been doing so much traveling for the past few months now. He states that sheltering at home is not that hard for him, since everywhere he traveled for years, people just naturally socially distanced from him. Tonight, his story concerns a camping incident from his Boy Scout days entitled A Raccoon Tale. Welcome, Kel.
Thank you. A Raccoon Tale. I was a Boy Scout. I know I don't look like I maybe was a Boy Scout, but I was a Boy Scout. My mother started out being a den mother, and so I was a Cubby. I was a Cub Scout, and then I came up through the ranks, became a Boy Scout, and my father occasionally would be the person who would take us on campouts and Boy Scouts, but not all of them, but a few now and then. He would be the supervising adult on these campouts. Now, Boy Scouts before the COVID virus had started, Boy Scouts was getting a lot of bad press. I realized that it was starting to get some very serious bad press before all this. And a lot of people, their impression, especially if they weren't a Boy Scout, a lot of people's impression may be that Boy Scouts consisted of a lot of, they say, what is that anyway? Well, and they may think, oh, isn't Boy Scouts just a bunch of pimple-faced young teen adolescent boys sitting around having some sort of a circle jerk in the woods around a campfire? And I would be the first to say, no. The campfire was putting off too much light, and therefore we'd be afraid the Scoutmaster might join in. So basically, seriously though, Boy Scouts was a lot of fun. In the woods, there was so much to learn, and there was so much that Boy Scouts did give in so many ways concerning the environment and so on. But I was a person myself that I tended to have a personality trait of questioning authority. And I maintained that attitude right up to today. In many cases, it was an unfortunate personality trait because it got me in trouble at various times in the neighborhood. It got me in trouble in school. It got me in trouble in Boy Scouts as well. When if there would be an incident that got me in trouble because of questioning authority, they'd report it sometimes to my father. My father would have a talk with me. He was a sergeant in World War II. And so he would just look at me when he would hear some of these things that would occur, and he would just say, all he would say was, well, that was kind of an asshat thing to do, you know. And I would agree, because if I did agree with Dad, he would let me off with less punishment and so on, and you'd be more contrition involved, and it would be less punishment. So this time period I'm speaking of, though, was the late 50s and early 60s. And that was a period when comic books had miraculous things in the back of comic books. You could open up a comic book at the time and see ads that you could get by mail that were just remarkable things. And so one ad that caught my attention before this particular campout that I'm going to tell you about, I looked in the comic book and it offered a raccoon tail. Now, I know that sounds absurd and it sounds very questionable, but like, where are these coming from and why are they being sold in the first place? But at that time, it seemed like a great idea to me. I mailed off $2, and at the time, you could wait for a couple of weeks. It would arrive in the mail, and it was a real raccoon tail, a genuine raccoon tail. I don't know if they got it off roadkill originally, but it was the real thing. It had 2 strings coming out of the end of the tail, so you could tie it to just about any. The way I used it quite often was tying it on my bicycle, my big fat tire bike, and I'd ride my bike around with that raccoon tail coming off. I just loved the thing. I could put it on my belt, and this is and wear it on my belt at the time. And this is this is a pre-Ted Nugent period when you could wear that, and it was to me, seemed very cool. And so I had this raccoon tail in my possession when we were going to have a particular Boy Scout camp out, and the adult that was going to be in charge of this particular camp out was my favorite assistant scoutmaster. His name was Mr. Haley. And Mr. Haley was the father of one of my good friends in the Boy Scout patrol that I was in. Patrol is smaller than the big troop of Boy Scouts. It was about 10 Boy Scouts. And we were going to have just a small camp out in the Blackjack Oak Woods of Oklahoma. And so I had this raccoon tail with me because at the last minute, I don't know why, I threw it in my backpack to take on this camp out. It was going to last about 3 days. And I threw it in, no particular reason whatsoever. But the reason I love Mr. Haley's campouts, the reason when he was in charge of the camp out that we would go on, I loved him because Mr. Haley would bring along an ice chest just for himself. He would keep it in his tent, and it'd be his own personal ice chest. And his son had informed me that Mr. Haley that's where Mr. Haley kept all of his Budweiser beer cans. He would just stock this ice chest up with beer. And here we are, very young boys going into the woods, and Mr. Haley would have this entire ice chest full of Budweiser. I always remember on campouts, Mr. Haley would quite often have a can of Budweiser with him. I know this is Boy Scouts, and I know this doesn't seem like the usual Boy Scout campout. That's why I'm telling the story. Well, at any rate, the Boy Scout law consists of 12 points, 12 points of Boy Scout law. A scout is trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. And that's the Boy Scout law. Those are 12 points, but my friend and myself, we would always add a 13th law, and we say, Boy Scout is a beer thief. We would break into his tent when he was out with some of the other boys, and we would steal a can every day, and we would sneak into the woods. We would split a can of that beer, and it made you feel like you were so grown up at the time, just to split a single can of Budweiser beer. But Mr. Haley was a jovial, he was a great guy on the whole camp out. And so these were some of my favorite campouts to go on. And he would take us on hikes up and down the woods and along creek beds and so on. And he would have certain projects he would want us to do. These are not projects you would find in the Boy Scout handbook anywhere. These are just projects Mr. Haley would somehow get in his mind that he wanted to do. And so one day on this particular camp out, he took us out in the woods and he brought with him a big heavy wooden box that, who knows, maybe he had more uniced beers in that big wooden box originally, but he had some supplies in. He brought it out in the woods with us. And all 10 of us were kind of gathered around like, Mr. Haley, what's gonna, what is this? And he goes, boys, today I'm going to show you how to catch an animal in the woods when we can catch a woodland creature. And so my immediate response was, and I'm in my nasal sort of voice at the time, because my voice hadn't changed, I was saying, Mr. Haley, well, Mr. Haley, what are we going to do once we catch it? And he said, well, boys, we're going to study it, and then we're going to set it loose. And so this was all very mysterious in a way, because the way the trap would work, he had set it up, he had put the heavy wooden box up on its corner like this, and then he put a stick on it, and then he had a cross stick he kind of lashed to it, and he stuck a big carrot on the end of that box, so that when the animal kind of goes in it, I guess the principle here was, it seemed like out of a cartoon to me at the time, but he pulls on the carrot, the heavy box falls down. I don't know if he was planning on the study, the animal part I didn't get either, because are you going to catch Bugs Bunny and then we're going to do philosophical questioning on the real meaning of what's up, Doc? Or I don't know what he was planning on catching in the woods. But we turned around, came back to the campsite, and on the way to the campsite, continuing the comic book motif here, on the way back to the campsite, a light bulb went off in my head, kind of like, bing! That comic light bulb that you might see in a comic book of somebody getting an idea on the way back to camp. And I thought, yes. And I reached into my pack instantly and got out that raccoon tail that I had brought for, I didn't know why. Ran back out to the trap that Mr. Haley had set on the trail. Put the raccoon tail sticking out from the box, knocked the sticks down so that the box is on top of the raccoon tail with the raccoon tail sticking out. Turned around, ran back into camp by myself, and I had my hands over my head, and they're all standing around the campfire. And I said, Mr. Haley, it's worked, Mr. Haley. There's something in the trap, Mr. Haley. So he's standing there, and he still has, I remember him having the beer in his hand, and his eyes got big around, and he goes, come on, boys, come on. And we all went screaming like a mob down that trail. He did put his beer down first by the campfire. We all went screaming out to the trail. And when we got to the trap, there was the box down, and that ringed raccoon tail is sticking out from under the box. Well, Mr. Haley came through all of us, because we're kind of crowding around the box and everybody's looking at the box. Mr. Haley made a sound kind of like a junior high cheerleader, a high squeal when he saw that tail. And he's just like, he leaped on top of it, and he turned to us and he put all of his weight on top of the box. He goes, we got us a coon, boys. We got us a coon. And he would put his ear, and we're all crowding around the box, and he put his ear down to the box, and he'd listen to it, and he goes, that coon's being awful quiet. That coon's being real quiet. Come on, we got a coon, boy. Go back to the camp. Get some nets in the camp. Now, nets, I don't know what he thought. I thought, who has nets? Nobody has nets. But we all went running back to the campsite anyway. And on the way back, I told the rest of the patrol, there's no coon in there. There's no raccoon in that box. I put a tail in that box. So they're all in on it. And we got back, and I was working on my merit badge for cooking at the time. So I just started the meal up, and we left him out there in the woods on top of that box. And it was far enough, it was far enough away where you could, in the distance though, you could hear the yells coming for the next 20 minutes. And it was, boys, are you getting those nets? Boys. It would go quiet for a while. We were all just dying. This was, to us, this was very funny for about 20 minutes. And he would keep, every once in a while, we'd hear that yelling, boys. Well, eventually what happened was a blood-curdling scream came all of a sudden out of the woods. It was like a Charlie Brown, arg, hurrah! And then my last name is Pickens. And all I heard from the distance was my name going, Pickens, Pickens. And it kept getting louder and louder. And everybody around the campfire stopped laughing and they started looking at me. And I'm standing there, I don't know what to do next. And all of a sudden he comes out of the woods saying my name louder and louder, waving that tail over his head, going, Pickens, Pickens. And there's red streaks in his face. And he's running towards the campfire. And then it turned into where all I could think of was staying on the other side of the campfire from Mr. Haley. So I was trying to stay, and it was like a Keystone Cop thing with him waving that tail around. But all of a sudden, he just stopped. He just stopped dead still. And his eyes just got this look in him while he was holding that tail. And his head went back, and this laughter, I'll always remember that until the day I die. That laughter was so sparkling and clear and cosmic and clean. He suddenly got the absurdity of this situation, the hilarity of what had just happened. And it was just amazing. And everybody went quiet while Mr. Haley, that laugh was so deep and pure that went out into the universe. And it was just a moment to remember. Well, after this got all settled down and he said, the best ever, Pickens, the best ever. He kept saying that the rest of the camp out. We got home, finally. My father was in the front yard, and we got out of the car, and Mr. Haley came up to him, and I thought, oh, this is going to be bad. But he said, your son just pulled the best practical joke on this camp out on me that's ever been pulled. He told him the whole story. They were laughing about it. He got back in the car to drive away, and when he did, my dad just kind of turned his head to the side as we're both waving to Mr. Haley, and he goes, that was kind of an asshat thing to do, you know? Yeah, I agreed with him. But you know, the Boy Scout motto is be prepared. And that day, I think as time went by, I started learning that, you know, life is not that way. There's many times in life where you can lift up that box. You've been planning on something and you lift up that box and there's nothing but a coon tail there. The raccoon is not in the box. You lift it up and you just see it. But what Mr. Haley taught me was the real meaning of be prepared. Be prepared in life to laugh at yourself. Thank you. Be prepared.
Thanks, Kel, for another hilarious life lesson. So our next storyteller is Karine King. Hold on one second here. Okay, so, all right. So Karine is a registered drama therapist who serves as a creative engagement specialist at 2 privately owned retirement communities. She's also a singer-songwriter who has recorded several albums, the last 2 which feature original songs that tell the stories of older adults and their joys, challenges, and sorrows. She's also the author of a book called Engage, 28 Creative Enrichment Experiences for Older Adults. In addition, she serves as an adjunct instructor at Allen Community College teaching public speaking and as a piano accompanist for schools and churches, and is also a puppeteer and freelance photographer. So Karine's pretty amazing, obviously. But unfortunately, because of the pandemic, she is currently out of work except for the public speaking course. She clearly wears a lot of hats, and she loves it that way. What gives her heart the most joy is her awesome husband, Jeff, her 5 amazing grown children and their spouses, and her adorable granddaughter, Boston. She also has a three-legged Kojak named Hank. Karen resides in Osage City, Kansas, where she lives with her husband in his boyhood home. Karine, if I said Karen there for a second, I apologize. Karine, welcome.
Thank you. All right. Well, speaking of 5 kids, I'm going to tell a story about my 5 children. And this happened many moons ago when they were really little. Actually, they were age 2 to 11. And this happened during a time many years ago when my husband and I were going through some really difficult challenges. And we live in a small bedroom community. And I think maybe at that time we might have all been stuck living in my in-laws' basement. Anyway, so I had this friend, her name's Darlene, and I used to always call her Timber Woman because she loved the great outdoors. She loved to go hunting for squirrels and rabbits and mushrooms, and she grew the tallest trees in all of the county, in my opinion. And she had this real ability to see a need and then want to meet it. And she could tell that I was going through a real struggle. And she said, Karine, you just need a nice dose of nature. You know what? I want to take you out to this place called the Fishing Trails. And so what I need you to do is you need to get your kids all dressed up in their tennis shoes, their jeans, their old t-shirts, and then you're going to meet us out at this certain place and we'll take you from there in our pickup. And so this sounded really exciting to me because I really wasn't that much of an outdoorsy person. And so this Fishing Trails area is located near our bedroom community in Osage County, and a lot of people come there to fish during spawning season. They come to fish for white bass and for crappie, and I had never heard about it. My husband had never heard about it, and so I was just excited for the adventure. So here we are. We all pile into her pickup truck, and we go to this remote area where she inches her pickup truck down this very jagged section of rocks, and we find an expansive rock area where little minnows were trapped in puddles of water, and the kids went exploring in the Dragoon Creek. And then we made a little campfire from the timber that was laying all around, and had hot dogs and had lunch, and then we piled back into the pickup truck, went a little bit way further, and we end up in this area that was very secluded and beautiful. Now this was in the month of March. It wasn't yet green out, spring hadn't yet sprung, but it was exciting to be in this place where there was this quiet stream that was nestled underneath this canopy of hardwood trees, really branches sweeping across and over the stream. And there was a high trail just adjacent to the stream, several feet above. And so we decided we would just get out of the pickup and we would venture into this little stream, this river, I guess. And the kids loved it. Now I had my 2-year-old, she wanted to get her feet wet. And so I took her in the crutch of my arms, and we waded into this beautiful, cool water, and it was just heavenly exhilarating experience. Everybody had a wonderful time. And pretty soon time ventured on, and we decided we would go for a hike on this trail. So we all got out of the water. We were muddy, we were wet, it was wonderful. And we walk up on the trail and we immediately start to forge the single file line. Now, my oldest son, Josiah, and Darlene's oldest son, Michael, and I think my oldest daughter, Joanna, they wanted to forge ahead. They were all kind of the explorers of the bunch, and they went so quickly that it wasn't soon before they were completely out of sight. Now, in the meantime, Darlene and I kind of lagged behind because we had my little 2-year-old and my 5-year-old with me, Rachel, my 2-year-old Catherine, and we're just kind of lagging behind, enjoying our time together. And all of a sudden, Catherine, she starts to point toward the left of where we were walking, and I look and I see this object in a tree nearby, and I look again, I look closely, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what is that? It was this doll head there was no color in it. It was bleached out. I'm sure it probably had just lodged in this little this branch from probably the, years gone by where the waters would rise high and then recede again. And so this hideous little doll head was stuck there. It was horrible, but I saw this opportunity. And really, without thinking this through at all, I just said to Darlene, I said, play along. Now, you see, my oldest son, Josiah, let's just say he was a bit of a challenge to raise, and he liked to terrorize his siblings often, and me. And I thought this would be a great chance to get back at him in a really fun way, because Josiah never appeared to be afraid of anything. So now he unfortunately was again out of sight with Michael and Joanna, but our son Jonathan was kind of stuck in between. And so I called out to Jonathan. I said, Jonathan, stop for a minute and look over there. And he looks, he goes, what? And I said, do you see that in the tree? He says, what is it? I said, it's a baby's head. He said, why is it all white? And I said, against my better judgment, I said, because the blood has drained out. Whoever's responsible might still be in the area. We need to get out of here quickly. Call for your brother and Michael. Tell them they need to get back here quick. Well, Jonathan looked horrified, but I was too intent on really getting at my oldest son to worry too much about Jonathan. However, I thought, I will make this deal. If I see one tear even emerge from his eyes, this prank is over. It's over. So anyway, Jonathan starts calling, and I can tell he's panicked, and it seems like an eternity has gone by. And finally, after I'm just about to give up, Josiah and Michael and Joanna appear. They emerge from the woods, and I say, you guys, kids, look over there. They go, what? And I said, come over, huddle around me. We have to get out of here quickly. Whoever's responsible for that baby's head in the tree could still be in the area. So I'm all excited. I can't wait to see my son be horrified. And we get closer, we're quiet, it's all dramatic. And all of a sudden we get there, and I'm waiting for this climactic moment. And Josiah looks and he goes, oh yeah, that's just a doll head. Oh my gosh, I'm so bummed. I'm like, that's it. Totally deflated moment. Now, unbeknownst to me, Josiah retrieves this doll head from that branch. I didn't see it happen. Because what was about to happen just a few days later is we were about to have our very first and only King Spring Arts Fling. And the whole deal about this was that all of the family members were invited, and they were supposed to present some kind of a arts-related presentation or performance. They had to do a song or a dance or a poem. And everybody was excited about it except for Josiah. He's like, that sounds boring. I'm not doing it. Well, anyway, the day comes, we're having our King Spring Arts Fling. We have a candlelight dinner. We have a little music in the background. Everybody's seated in the living room, all prepared to do their presentations. And everybody takes their turn, and it's wonderful. And I'm thinking, Josiah's probably not going to do it, whatever. Well, in the very last moment, he stands up. He has his hands behind his back, and he begins to recount the entire story. He's completely thrilled to tell the story, which was a shock to me because he withheld any sort of interest in this whole episode until that moment. And as soon as the story was over, he pulls out this doll head from the sack from behind his back, and he lifts it up and he shows it to the family. Oh, this was a moment of joy for me. I'm like, oh, he loved it. He just didn't want to admit it until that moment. Well, so I was thrilled. I kept the doll head. I found out later that Josiah often would take the doll head to his classroom and show it to his friends for show and tell. And I would take the doll head when I was substitute teaching back in the day, and I would use it in storytellings, and I would scare the kids with it. It was so much fun. And then later I became a graduate teaching assistant at Kansas State University, and I always had the students tell a narration speech. And so I always, with such excitement, I would bring that doll head inside the sack. I would tell the story for them as an example of a fun story. And this went on for quite some time until one day when I was getting ready to retrieve this doll head, I think from one of the cubby holes right behind me, went in there to get this doll head and it wasn't there. And I thought, where is it? This can't be. I mean, this was like a priceless treasure. I looked everywhere. I looked up and down. I looked through the house. I couldn't find it. And finally, I just had to resign myself to the likelihood that I left it behind in a hurry at Kansas State University. When I was rushing from class to class, I must have just left it on my desk. I'm guessing a custodian must have found it, thought it was trash, threw it away, and I figured I'm never going to see it again. I cried and I cried and I cried the whole afternoon with sobs of despair because that doll head symbolized more than just a fun moment. It symbolized this moment of connection with my oldest son. And I don't know, it was very difficult. I didn't know my children were observing this, their mother falling apart over a hideous doll head. Now, a few months later, it's Christmas time, and my daughters had a gift for me all wrapped up. I had no idea what it would be. And I open up this box and they're all excited. And I pull out of the box this hideous doll head. And what I discovered is that they felt such empathy for my pain that somehow they figured out a way to find a doll head at Hobby Lobby. And then they brought it home and they set fire to it and charred it so that it would look hideous, just as hideous as the doll that I found in the tree. And it was the most beautiful gift. And I'm telling you what, this one I hang on to. The end.
Thank you, Karine, for your very sweet story. Next up is Eddie Herman, or Edward. Edward is a father, a musician, the oldest of 12, and an immigrant. His story is unique. While he's always felt that way about himself, he's just now learning the power of his story. You're up, Eddie.
I was an immigrant in Uncle Sam's Navy. How I got there is not the real story, but I felt special, and it wasn't because I was there. You see, it had only been 6 years prior to that time in the military that I had come to the United States. At the time I went in, I was the oldest of what was then 11 children. Number 12 was shortly on the way. I might have felt special because I came from a different country. It wasn't yellow school bus special, mind you. It wasn't anything like, say, Michael Jordan special. I felt special maybe because of some of the circumstances I grew up. My father was a very strict parent, and he was religious. I wasn't allowed to have any friends when I came to the United States. He'd say, he's like, what do you need friends for? I make many friends for you right here, you see? And there was not a lot of attention to go around when you're the oldest of that many kids, except for when it came to the beatings and the berating. And so shortly before I was due to deploy, I found myself on the end of a whiplashing at the piece of an 18-inch garden hose about that long, on the end of which had my angry father hacking at me like a kid does with a wooden sword on a tree. I was a couple inches taller than him at that time. I remember it was a very trying time for me, and I wrote a letter, took 2 suitcases, and a couple of hours later I was gone. A few days right before I deployed. Stayed with a friend and moved on. And the military life, well, the military life suited me. I still felt special. Mind you, however much special you can feel when you look like everybody and you dress like everybody, right? You're marching along with everybody. But I remember that the brotherhood that I had at home, and I'm pretty tight with my family, with my brothers and sisters, specifically with my brothers, was now replaced by the brotherhood of the military. And we would do things. I remember sharing in that camaraderie. I did take on some extracurricular activities, something that I wasn't allowed to do at home. I went and joined the choir. I even sang a solo. It was something quite surreal to sit there with 250 other souls and sing in one voice and then go into harmony. Anchors away, my boys. I remember the marching. Now, the marching was one of the things that stood out. This was 32 plus years ago. We'd have 84 guys split up into 2 different groups, 3 lines each. And the senior chief petty officer all of a sudden would go, to the rear, march! And everybody would turn around and do a 180, step out. We'd hot dog. We'd go in between each other. Somebody would, our cadence caller would get fancy every now and then. They'd be like, if you wanted some last night, stomp your left and drag your right. And then you would just stomp your left. I remember sitting around and telling stories. And you find out that everybody has a story. And I felt special. But I was learning everybody else's story. Our cadence caller was Seaman Recruit Smalls. Seaman Recruit Smalls was a well-stacked guy, probably about 5'10", black as night. He'd call me white, we'd call him black. It was from Louisiana, and he was our cadence caller. Now, most companies had their own cadence callers, and they'd stay pretty vanilla, right? Left, right, left, right, left, left, right, left. Ours had a little flavor. Seaman Recruit Smalls got into it, boy. He would give us a little Flintstone, actually be like, left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left. He'd do a little Addams Family, right? Your left or right and left, right to left or right and left. And we would all march, boy. And me and my special self, I'll be right there with him. And I learned stories. And everybody had one. I had mine. Don't remember sharing mine much, but that feeling of being special permeated. I'm older now. I'd like to tell you that military was a career that made me, and I'm who I am, and I feel even more special because of what I did in the military. But sadly, after 2 years, Uncle Sam couldn't make up his mind what kind of career they wanted to give me. So in the end, they defaulted on the contract, and I got a general discharge. I'd like to tell you that I made up with my father, and somehow we reconciled, and we're one big happy family. But the truth is, I still can't wait for the old man to croak so I can go piss on his grave every time I take the pitch, because I was very athletic, and I had missed out on a lot by not having any friends, not being exposed, all that religion and strict growing up in a brand new land where you're not allowed to mingle. It was a weird time. But I'll tell you what I did learn. While we were sharing stories, I learned to see that I am indeed special, but so is everyone else. One of the hats that I currently wear is that of an executive coach, a messaging coach. And what I'm learning is that indeed I am special. But it is because I've learned to see the special in others. And that makes everything special when everyone around you has their story. I'm a father. I've raised 3 kids. They're special. So I'm special because I can see the special in everyone. Anchors away, Dave.
Eddie, thank you for sharing your story. That was wonderful. All right, moving on. Our next storyteller is Nate Clark. So when Nate's not writing software for teams at work, he can be found under a dog pile of 3 boys, cooking with his wife, or riding his bicycle around boards. Nate's going to share a story entitled Outer Banks. Take it away, Nate.
In college, I had the opportunity to take an internship out on the East Coast. It was in Rolla, North Carolina, which for me it felt like more south than I was used to. And it did not suit me well. I did not get along with the Southern hospitality. I did not get along with the kind of Southern mentality. Apologize if anybody here is from the South. But I found myself, to give you an idea of how uncomfortable I was, I would meander and find myself down at the local Home Depot because inside the Home Depot, the floor plan is exactly the same around the world. And so I could walk into a Home Depot and feel like I was back home. But most of the time, to kind of relieve the pressure of like the social circumstances, I would go driving. I would go driving on the weekends. I was working really hard during the week, and on the weekends I would drive. Had a pickup truck, and I would just kind of head normally towards the coast for a little bit of fun. And it was really surprising recounting some of these things, but I can remember I picked up more hitchhikers in like that semester than I ever had in my entire life. And I did so like pretty excitedly until, I kid you not, one day I picked someone up and was talking to them, and about a half a mile later I saw the sign on the side of the highway that said, like, you're now entering like a prison stretch. Please avoid picking up hitchhikers for the next 3 miles. And my heart just sank. And the next 67 miles was the longest ride of my life, because I'm sitting there the whole time with this guy in the side, sitting next to me in the pickup, who I had picked up just outside of that sign in the prison. One night I went down kind of south, almost to South Carolina, and I couldn't find a place to stay, so I just backed my pickup up against the beach, and I was like, I'm just gonna sleep out on the dunes tonight. So I grabbed my sleeping bag and I went out. It was about 11 o'clock at night, and kind of found a valley in the sand dunes, and I crawled into my sleeping bag, and I'm sitting there and I see this beautiful stars and kind of down out of the wind, so it's quiet and it's nice. And it was very peaceful until I heard this like scritchy, scratchy, scritchy sound, and I turned and I looked around, and there were hundreds of little white crabs crawling down into the valley with me, trying to nestle into my sleeping bag. And I noped out of that real quick, and was actually looking for another place to stay, and looked down the street and I saw a steeple with a cross on the top. And so I thought I could probably park in a church parking lot, and it turned out to be a church retreat camp. And I was pretty bold in those days, and so I just walked into this church retreat camp and walked up to the first cabin and tried the door, and it was unlocked and there was nobody inside. And so I just camped out, set my alarm for like 5 o'clock in the morning, and camped inside this small wood-clad room with bunk beds, but it was at least no crabs that evening. But the main story that I want to tell you tonight was just of the time that I kind of got stuck. And it came to mind just because I've been in this house for 57 days, and I have this sense of feeling stuck. And I know that that's probably something a lot of people are feeling right now. But I cruised out, and this weekend in particular, I had decided to go to the Outer Banks. And so I drove to the coast, and this was Saturday afternoon or so, and I bought myself a ferry ticket and drove onto the ferry. And I can remember going up to the front of the ship, and as you're driving along, or as the boat is going out towards the Outer Banks, just looking down and seeing the kelp in the water and dolphins coming up and catching a ride on the front of the boat, and just having this unreal experience, getting to go out to kind of an island place. And I went up to the top deck and found a crew member there, and I said, hey, what time does the ferry come back tonight? And he looked at me and he said, I'm sorry, this is the last ferry out for the evening. You know, this is the one-way ticket. I said, oh, okay, well, that's a bummer. You know, my heart sank a little bit. But I said, that's all right. Do you know how much longer it takes to drive off the north side of the island? Because there was a bridge off the north side of the Outer Banks. And he looked at me and he said, well, it had an hour and a half or so, but the hurricane just came through and completely wiped out the roads up there. So there is no exit off the north side of the island. You can only come and go on the south side of the island. And so I realized that I was going to be stuck there for a while. And I said, okay, that's fine. What time is the ferry tomorrow morning? And he says, well, there's a ferry at 8. I said, oh, that'll be fine. That'll give me plenty of time to get back to Raleigh, you know, get ready for work on Monday morning. They'll be just fine. And he goes, but tomorrow is Sunday. And this seemed like a very obvious statement. And I said, yeah, tomorrow is Sunday. And he looked and he goes, yeah, but tomorrow is Sunday. And I had no idea what this means. And he said, he goes, son, he goes, folks that live out here, they've been planning to go home on Sunday for months. Every ferry ticket is sold out tomorrow. They've been sold out for months. There is no way to get back on the ferry tomorrow. And I just remember my heart just dropping out of the bottom of my chest, trying to think through all the contingency plans that I was going to have to go through, how to apologize to people at work that I'd somehow managed to get myself lost on an island out on the coast and stuff like that. And it felt really bad for about 45 minutes on the rest of that ferry ride. But then something really neat happened. And what happened was I realized that I was stuck. I had no control over any of the situation. There was nothing that I could do to make things progress faster. I couldn't add another ferry. I couldn't barge, I couldn't clear the roads to get off the island or anything like that. And with it came this unexpected sense of peace. And just that I was stuck there, and there was nothing that I could do about it. There was nothing to stress about. There was nothing to make it better. And I got probably one of the more relief or peace that I'd had, because I was so completely out of control. And so that evening, I went down and I had dinner somewhere, and I drove down the beach, couldn't find a place to stay. And so I drove out onto the beach, and there was a gal out there in an RV. And I drove up next to her and I said, hey, I'm stuck here. And where can I stay? And she said, well, you're not allowed to sleep on the beach, but you can fish on the beach all night long. And she said, here's a fishing pole. And she goes, just stick it in the sand in the back of your truck. And if anybody asks you, you're just fishing and you're fishing with me. My name's Jane. That'll be your story. And so I pulled my truck around and I backed it up to the ocean, and I had a clamshell top. So I opened up the clamshell top and I grabbed my sleeping bag and just going there. And it was just this beautiful acoustics of the ocean washing over me as it kind of bounced around in the back of my pickup truck, being completely stuck. And I slept like a baby. And I woke up at 7 the next morning, as soon as the first light, and I drove down to the harbor there to try and catch a ride on the ferry. Long lines, and I was terrified that I would never get on the boat. But the neat thing was, turns out everybody knew that the hurricane came through. And so all those people that had booked those plans months in advance never went on that vacation. And so I was on the first ferry off and got home, and everything was just fine. But it was a perspective that I'm trying to carry with me right now. Just that I'm stuck and it's out of my control, but in that moment I can find some peace and find some relief. So that's my story.
Thank you, Nate. Yeah, I had just jotted down inner peace. Seems like the kind of feeling that you came to, and that's pretty cool. I think that's what a lot of us could use right about now. So thanks for sharing your story. All right, our next storyteller is Mike Viron. Mike immigrated from the Soviet Union in 1992 and has been a Kansas resident ever since. Many of Mike's stories resonate particularly well with me since I studied for a semester in the Soviet Union in 1989 when I was in college, and I saw firsthand some of the absurdities and hardships of life under that regime that Mike has shared with us, with his particularly wry sense of humor and deadpan delivery. Mike's story is entitled How I Was a Yiddish Singer. Take it away, Mike.
Hi, I hope this works. So this is a story about how I was a Yiddish singer. And Yiddish is the language of European Jews that was spoken in Eastern Europe, and now is mostly New York and parts of Israel. I was born and raised in Ukraine, the city of Odessa, and Odessa was known for having like a huge Jewish population, because back in the days of Russian Empire, it was outside of Pale settlement, meaning Jews were allowed to settle in Odessa, and they did. And the history of Jews in Odessa was up and down. There were like bad times, like pogroms of early 1900s, and then of course Holocaust, where like thousands and thousands of people were killed. And but when I was growing up in the 70s, the Jewish population in Odessa had its renaissance, and there were Jewish artists and musicians and professors and just all over the place. Jewish people were prospering, and while the Soviet government kept the immigration under control, people did what they could, and so it was good time. And but I have to say that most people, for adult Jews, because like the kids like me didn't even know we were Jewish, because like nobody told us. And a few years ago, I was reading a website where people like me, like who immigrated to different countries, were talking about how they found out they were Jewish. And the common thing was it wasn't from their parents, because the parents just kept it quiet. And we always found out like in a fight, or somebody was trying to say something bad, or somebody was trying to give us a compliment, or maybe somebody in the store, or like an angry classmate, somebody would yell like a bad word, or somebody would say a good word, but he was never at home. And so that's why I always thought that we don't really see eye to eye with like American Jewish people, because American Jewish people always were like knew who they were, from the days they were born. They were like carried to a rabbi, and they had like parts snipped, and then they had like all kinds of ceremonies and all kinds of stuff happening, while we didn't even know about a rabbi or what a rabbi was, or any ceremonies, and we just grew up without knowing any of that, and didn't even know that we're supposed to be like part of like a great Jewish conspiracy, and just kind of doing our thing. So always kind of like our nationality was conveyed to us like with sad glances and like winks, and kind of saying, like, that people kind of felt bad for us being Jewish, because like it meant, like back in the USSR, it just meant your opportunities were limited, or you had to do better than most people to get to on equal footing. So during that time, there were like most people in Odessa, and probably everywhere else, had like an underground recordings of like of music. They called them Odessa songs, and they were usually like fun songs. People played them at the weddings, and they had some lyrics that were sometimes funny, sometimes dirty, sometimes kind of tongue-in-cheek. Some of it were like in Yiddish, but I didn't even know it was Yiddish. I just knew it was something. And then even at that time, it was still not uncommon to, like, where my grandmother lived in a small town near Odessa, for my grandma to meet a friend and start speaking Yiddish. I had no idea what it was. I just thought it was just a normal thing to say. You know, I didn't understand. I still don't speak Yiddish besides what normal people even here know, like words like schmear and schmuck and shlomazel and shlemiel. So I didn't know Yiddish, but I learned all those songs, and you know, they were in Russian with some Yiddish parts. And I also didn't know I couldn't sing, but like I really was enthusiastic about it. And when I was in school, like maybe in first grade, we were supposed to have a school concert, and I decided to like audition with one of the songs. And the auditioning committee was my teacher, and her last name was Rosenberg, which is like a common Jewish name, and also one of the classmates' father, his name was Schneider, also like a Jewish name. So I went out and I really started singing that song. And the song I was singing was called Rachel, or Rachila in Jewish kind of name, May You Croak, but I Love You. And they have like lyrics like, May you croak, I love you, I can't live without you, but we will get married and you will plump up. It was like really tongue-in-cheek, kind of like a borderline dirty lyrics. And then the Yiddish part started, and I really went out on that too, even though I had no idea what I was saying, but I really did my best singing it. And just maybe a few years ago, I had somebody translate it to me. And so now I know what I was singing. And it was kind of like this. It was Affen Boyden backen Knishes. That means they're making knishes in the attic. And knishes is like potato buns that, from Eastern Europe. And sometimes you can find them here in New York. The next line was Fenem tuches shitzes chmeil, meaning the flour is pouring out their ass. And then the next line was, as der tode trend in moment, that means when Papa is stooping Mama, and Kinder machen sich allein. That means kids are playing along. And so I really did my best singing this. My teacher and my classmate's father, they were just crying and crying, listening to me, because like I was really happy about it. I did my best. I was really, and I finished with Kinder machen sich allein. The kids were playing along, and really proud of myself and really proud of that song. And they were just rolling with tears and wiping them out because we didn't have Kleenex, so they had to use like newspapers and rags. So I did not get to sing in the school concert, and the teacher was friendly with my parents, so she just called and asked my mom to please contain my singing talents at home, and so I since then, it's been like 40 plus years, never sing in public in any language, and I mostly, like when I try to sing, I make sure nobody's around, and even like in the shower, I'm not really loud because like I learned my lesson, and I still remember those songs, but now I know what they mean, and you know, since then, the songs are playing, and they're like fun to listen to. Kind of unite, you know, like when I mention them to my friends, it's some fun memories of how we were singing. My mom still reminds me about what happened back in the first grade and how I was an Yiddish singer, and That's how I was a leading singer.
Thank you, Mike. Your stories are always so interesting, but also so great with the humor that you bring. So thank you. All right, so we have 3 stories left, and one of them is going to be a short story, but will be the one after this one. So the next storyteller is Dan Parker Timms. Dan is an arborist. So I looked that up. It means he performs surgery on trees. I think that for Dan, though, being a tree surgeon is not simply a job. It is more like he is an artist, and the trees are his canvas. Dan has fascinating stories about climbing trees for a living and his life in trees. He shares some of these stories at a local event here in Lawrence called Tree Talks. When things return to normal, if you get the chance, I highly recommend attending one of the Tree Talks in the hopes of hearing Dan talk about his relationship to trees. It's fascinating. In addition to being a tree climber by day, Dan is a poet, rapper, writer, and storyteller by night. Dan Parker Timms has a story entitled Courage. Go ahead, Dan.
Thank you, David. You make all of that sound so fancy, really much more interesting than it actually is. When David asked me if I'd tell a story at the slam, I had some trepidation, actually maybe chagrin or shame even about telling one of my own stories. You know, you think about what's going on in the world now with the global pandemic and what's happening politically in our country, and it just seemed wrong almost to go back and tell a nostalgic story from earlier in the world that came before this. But I thought about it for a while, and eventually I pulled up one, kind of a short one, that I thought might have something to say to the current situation. So the prologue to this story actually begins in the summer before my 7th grade year, middle school, then it was junior high school. And my family went on one of our epic family vacations, which to my father meant you loaded the station wagon with all his tools. He was a sign painter by trade. You took about $45 maybe, which is what you had in your pocket, and you set off across the country to sort of see every relative who was scattered throughout the continent. And he would work his way across the country. That in itself is a story. But suffice it to say that we got to the border of Canada. I can't remember the year, but there was a World's Fair in Vancouver, and it was his plan to go to the World's Fair. But when we stopped at the border, the Canadians noticed all the ladders tied to the top of the station wagon and buckets of paint. And they asked what we would do in Canada. And my father said that he would work. And so they turned us around at the border and sent us back. We took a circuitous route that landed us in a town, Alexandria, Minnesota, where we stayed for a month painting a sign with a giant Viking on it. The result of all that was that I was 6 weeks late to the start of the 7th grade, which I don't know if you remember middle school or junior high school, but that can be difficult. You come into class, you have no idea what's going on. You're not up to speed with your algebra or anything. So there was a boy who I had known from before that year, but he volunteered to help me kind of catch up and get up to speed in the 7th grade. His name was Billy Appleton. So he really just went with me through every class. We were all in the same sort of track, I guess, and just spent every day helping me, filling me in, and I caught up, and in that process we became really good friends. It's an amazing theme tonight. Not only are there travels, but also fishing, and the thing that we bonded about was fishing. It's Northern California on the coast. The ecosystem there and some of the best fishing is based on loop streams, which steelhead are they're a sea-run rainbow trout, like a salmon. But every year they go in and out of creeks, and they live in those creeks. And sometimes the spring rains never come, and they're trapped in the creeks. And they're beautiful, just vibrant colored fish. Of course, you're not supposed to catch them, but we spent a lot of time hiking through the backwoods and fishing salmon eggs and log jams, and sneaking down to the harbor and using our fly rods with squid and catching a lot of steelhead, and took a couple of ill-fated boat trips, which are other stories as well, where we ate raw loon, swamped our boats, nearly died of hypothermia, et cetera, et cetera. So my father, if you've ever seen the great film Paper Moon with Ryan and Tatum O'Neal, it's about a grifter who travels the America of the Depression on the dirt roads and pulls various scams. My dad was somewhat like that. And Billy Appleton, this boy's name, his father was the superintendent of schools, which I didn't really understand at the time. Billy later went on to become class president, almost valedictorian, but his grades in English weren't quite good enough. He was an interesting kid. He was a large, sturdy boy of tremendously upright character. Not quite a popular kid, not quite one of the star athletes or the tough kids, but it was somebody with, he was a serious character. Became an Eagle Scout. And I remember one of the definitive stories of him, I was watching, he was playing a soccer game. Like I say, he was a big bone boy, and he went to
We lose Brother Dan.
Looks like it.
probably don't call it by this name, and I hate to say it, but just for historical accuracy, I'll need to. It was called Smear the Queer, and in its purest essence, basically, you'd have a ball, any sort of ball would do, football, basketball, and it would get tossed into the air, and one kid would grab it and start running, and everybody else, sometimes the entire male population of the school, would chase this kid and knock them down and wrestle them, and whoever, you know, was intrepid enough would grab the ball and take off running. And at some point, I think toward the end of our 6th grade year, may actually have been Billy's father who banned this game in school. Terribly rough and unfair, and pretty hard on the kid who actually had the ball. And so the game evolved. It was no longer played openly by most of the school, but there was a group of kids, and they were sort of the tough kids. They tended to be the athletes, and they would on occasion form a group, maybe 6 or 10 of them would wander around the school, and they would pick one target and they would wrestle that person to the ground, and they'd get some dirt or some mud and they'd smear it on their face. Then they'd yell, "Smear the queer," and run away. So one day I was standing with Billy in the schoolyard. We're probably talking about fishing, you know, what sort of flies work best on the top of the water as opposed to what streamers you'd use on a trout in the mountains. And I saw out of the corner of my eye this group of boys coming across the schoolyard. Billy was my best friend, I have to say. And I could see what they were up to. They picked one of the toughest targets there was, and they were gonna get Billy. And I stepped a few steps to the side, and sure enough, these boys ran up and grabbed him and started wrestling. And it took every one of them to knock him down. He was that big and strong, but they finally knocked him down and grabbed some dirt and smeared it in his face. And I stood off to the side. I knew they would get me if I jumped in. And Billy got back up and dusted himself off and looked at me, and I looked at him. Kind of pretended like that had never happened, maybe started our conversation back up. And it didn't happen right away, excuse me, really fast or anything, but sort of after that day, we started moving toward not being best friends, little bit by little bit. He took one path and I took another, went to Purdue, became an engineer, started smoking a lot of pot and surfing. And by the end of high school, we hardly ever spoke to each other. But these days, more often than you'd really think, because random moments really, I'm driving my truck around and the evening is coming on. I think to myself, really with every bit of me, I think to myself, man, wish I'd had a little more courage. Thanks.
Thank you, Dan. Appreciate your story very much. So I asked earlier for any impromptu short stories, and it turns out we only have time for one, which is going to be the next story. This is going to be a story from Letitia Randolph. She is the mother of 3 and the wife of 1. She is a business owner, a Toastmaster, a community leader, and a friend of Rick Chandler, who told the story earlier about the boxing story. And he invited her to this story slam tonight. So tonight she will share a quick story about a funny drive home from church. Letitia?
Thank you so much. Well, we were in the car. We had just left church, my husband and I, and I'm sure at least 2 kids were in the back at that time. And we were driving home. It's only about a 15-minute drive. And my husband, who's very playful like me, that's why we're so good for each other, turns to me and says, "Let's play a game." And so, of course, I'm down. Games, fun? Yeah, that's me. Bring it on. So he says, so I speak Spanish fluently. So he says, "I'm going to say some words, and I want you to tell me whether or not they're real Spanish words." So he starts making up these words. He says stuff like, and I don't even remember what the words were because they weren't real. He was just making them up. He says something like, "Slasha goody." And I'm like, no, that's not a word. Then he says something like, "La Donna Day," or something weird and crazy. I'm like, no, that's not a word. So he proceeds to keep saying all these words. He probably says about 3 or 4 of these really crazy nonsense words. And I keep telling him, no, that's not a word. Finally, he says this one. Now, before I tell you what he said, he just knew that this one was gonna be a real Spanish word. "Cuadriuno," he says, with confidence. And I look at him and I'm like, no, that's not a word. He said, "Yes, it is." And I said, in a very deep voice, I said, "No, it's not." Now listen, I'm talking minor in Spanish. I studied abroad in Cuba. I've been speaking for like 30 years. And he is insisting that cuadriuno is a word. And I said, "No, Charles, that's not a word." He said, "Yes, it is. I heard it on your voicemail." So let me tell you about the voicemail so you can have the context. I'm a Christian, and so on my voicemail at that time, I left a scripture in Spanish and in English. So I did it in English first. It's Psalms 34:1. In English, it's, "I will bless the Lord at all times, and his praise shall continually be in my mouth." In Spanish, it's, "Bendiceré a Jehová en todo el tiempo, su alabanza estará de continuo en mi boca." Salmos 34:1. Charles had taken the last little piece of my voicemail and thought it was a word, cuadriuno. Well, it's 34:1, which is 34:1. He thought that cuadriuno was a word and he insisted, and it was so funny. We started cracking up laughing, and I can tell this story in English or in Spanish and everybody laughs at it. I hope you're laughing. I know I can't hear you. Everybody laughs at it because he really thought it was a word. Well, here's the moral. Please, always, number 1, go take a real Spanish class or ask someone before you assume that a word is a word in Spanish. Don't take a piece of a story and try to make it real. You have to know the full context, unless maybe you want to laugh like we did on the way home from church.
I think we're all laughing. So, Letitia, thank you for joining us on this story slam. We hope to see you next year. All right, so closing out the 2019-2020 season with the final story of tonight is Andrew Rameli. Andrew is what I would call, I introduced Andrew this way last year, and I actually am just repeating what I said last year, but here goes. He's what I would call a quadruple threat. He performs in musical theater all over Northeast Kansas. I have been in shows with him and have seen him perform multiple times. He can clearly sing, dance, and act with the best of them. But he also tells engaging and witty and thought-provoking stories. So a true quadruple threat. Now, it also turns out he's also a nurse anesthetist. So really, he's actually a quintuple threat. So anyway, here's Andrew Rameli with a story entitled Lucky.
Thanks, David. You can take one of those away. We still have not established I can dance at all. In fact, I think most people would argue against it. Okay, so first off, Dan, you had a really good locker mate. I remember my locker mate was a cockroach the size of a Pringle. So I still think no matter what, you got the better part of that deal. But that's not part of the story at all. So in life, I have found that there are moments that force us to stop and to look and to evaluate the things that are going on around us, the things that brought a moment, the choices we made, the choices we didn't make. Stuck halfway of the ductwork in my basement with my jeans falling off my ass and cut rate all these peanut butter slathered on the first and second fingers of my right hand, trying to entice a hamster to crawl the last 3 feet from the duct so that I could grab him, while my oldest child was banging on the ductwork with the other end of a broom trying to scare it at me, was one of those moments in my life. How we get to that moment is really part of the story. So there's some things you have to understand about my family dynamics with pets that got me into that ductwork, and also my third born's relationship with pets. So I think we all can agree that there are reasons that, like, traffic controllers are only allowed to watch so many planes. There are reasons that intensive care nurses can only have so many patients. There is only so much a human being can do and watch and monitor at one time. I have 6 children. I'm really, really happy that they are all still alive and relatively successful. So far, no one's in jail that I know of, and that's good. But pets have suffered a little bit. So we've had a parakeet that died of dehydration and ended up like turkey jerky. We had a wiener dog that died of heat exhaustion. So if you're not catching the irony of the fact that we had a roasted wiener, I don't know what you're doing in life. We also had a betta fish that froze to death. A fish froze to death. So now we have a roasted wiener and we have like frozen fish patties. These are all of our pets. We also had a rabbit named Duchess, a sweet little girl Duchess, who a year later we found out was actually a duke, but nobody wanted to change his name. So he had just ended up Duchess, who ended up like a Jackson Pollock painting all over my children's bedroom when my yellow lab decided to play just a little bit with its entrails. So came home from work to that action. And so those are just like the pets, not including the other animals that just found their way into our house, like skunks that came in the back door, like a bird that flew in the kitchen window and then got stuck in the then time fan and got like filleted and into this poof of feathers all over. There was a raccoon that came in the back door. It was awful. And the most memorable of those moments was the time that a bat flew in to the upper story of this house that we had in Ottawa. And in true family loving ways, the 2 older brothers pushed the 3rd oldest down so they could get past his prone body to the door, which they promptly slammed shut, leaving him curled in the fetal position. And this bat circled around him for 20 minutes until I could get up there and unlock the door from the outside and then come in and then grab this bat with a Winnie the Pooh pillowcase, take him outside and release him. And so it's odd then that this child later came to me at a young age and asked for a hamster, because he had like a little thing about rodents after being terrified by this bat. In fact, his siblings still think to this day he's going to end up like Batman, except for because of his bat trauma, except for the fact that he's not a millionaire yet. Both his parents are alive, which is good. And I'm glad about the millionaire, because I don't want him to make one of those like bodysuits that are made of Kevlar but still have nipples. And I've never understood Batman having nipples on his bodysuit. That made no sense to me. But so he came to me and said, "Hey, Dad, I really want this hamster." And as a middle kid, you know, anyone out there with a lot of kids knows there are little moments when you have to go the little extra mile for the middle kid, because they don't get as much attention, they don't get as much time. So I was like, yes, absolutely, you can have this hamster. It's a $750 investment. That's pretty cheap to making you happy. Ended up being a whole lot more than $7.50, but we're gonna get there too. So we brought this teddy bear hamster, which was this sleek black hamster. He was beautiful. He was gorgeous. We got this little hamster habit trail thing, the little ball you put him into, you know. And we brought him home, and you know, this whole time in my head, I'm thinking, this is probably not going to end well, because no pet has survived any particular length of time in our house without trauma. But it's worth it. It's worth a try, and it's a hamster, so it's going to be fine. So we get home, and we've set up the little habit trail, and it's got those fresh pine chips that smell so good, and the hamster climbs in, and he nuzzles into his little thing, and he's got a little thing of lettuce, and it's beautiful. And the whole time I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop, because I know, like, this hamster's going to explode or catch on fire, or it turns out it's not a hamster, it's like a baby like monitor lizard or something, and it's going to end up killing us in our sleep. Something is going to happen with this friggin' hamster, but nothing happened. He just loves this hamster, and everything's great. So I just saw the comment. Yes, it did come from Pet World, though. I saw that little comment on the chats. Sorry, Pet World. Props. So sure shit, 3 weeks later, I'm just doing my thing, and Nate comes to me in tears, just snot and everything, and he's freaked out. He says, "Dad, Chunk is gone." Hamster's name was Chunk. Chunk was his name. And so I'm like, "Buddy, all right, well, let's find him." And so we start looking. We're looking everywhere. We look high, we look low. He's gone. Like, you're not fine. He's a rodent. He's a rat, and he's escaped. He's not coming back. He's not like waiting for me like in the foyer for a lift back to his hamster habit trail. He's gone. So we decide we're gonna have like a little service for Chunk, you know, like in absentia. He's gone now, but we're gonna celebrate his life and how wonderful he was, and we say good things about Chunk, and it's kind of moving and it's gorgeous. And a couple weeks go by, and I suggest to Nate, you know, we should probably get rid of your hamster habit trail, and you know, Chunk doesn't need it anymore. Nate's decided no, he's not getting rid of it. He's going to leave it up, and you know, I'm like, okay, it's fine. I'm not going to argue. I'm busy. I can barely like keep clean clothes in the kids. I'm not going to argue about the friggin' hamster habit trail. About a week after that, I'm downstairs, and I hear this. And I'm freaking out because I'm thinking, I got a rat in here somewhere. So I'm looking all over, and I'm in the basement. I follow, and there's the ductwork. And I hear running back and forth. And sure as shit, through one of the little outflow vents, this beady little nose comes through with these dead eyes that are just staring into my soul. And it's Chunk. And he's looking at me from about 6.5 feet up in the air and just taunting me. And then boop, he comes in, boop, he comes back. And we do this game for a couple minutes. And I'm like, Nate! And I call to Nate. And he comes down. And of course, this is back when I was, well, super, super poor. And when I don't even think we had cable. We had nothing to do, right? So this became a spectator sport. So all the kids came running down. Some of them in clothes, not. And it ends up, we finally like sort of corner Chunk with the brooms and all this stuff, and I can't fit, nobody can fit into the little vent space. So I end up having to cut away this vent piece this big that I'm now crawling into, and I'm sort of, you got Adam banging on it with the broom, and it sort of comes and it goes, and it comes and it goes, and I yelled at Nate, give me something that he likes, and we'll see if he'll come to it. So Nate comes back about 20 seconds, all these peanut butter. Says, Daddy loves this. Okay. So now I got this big scoop of peanut butter on my hands, and I'm like, here you go, Chunk. And we're doing this dance for like 20, 30 minutes, and sure as shooting, eventually he just sort of like makes a decision. He looks at me and sort of resigned, right? It's his choice. He's choosing to come to me. So he walks boldly, I might add, boldly across this thing, pops into my hand, looks at me, gives a sniff, starts eating the peanut butter. So I'm like, okay, we got him. So I gently hold him and I take him upstairs. The kids are cheering. They've lost their mind. Their little Care Bear pajama things are asunder. It's crazy. It's the best thing we've had since High School Musical came on DVD. It's amazing. So then we go upstairs and I'm taking him with this thought of, I'm Chunk's savior. Like, I have saved Chunk from the bowels of these ductworks, and how scared he must have been. And aren't you happy? And he looks at me as I'm about to lay him down into the soft, fresh pine that's been laid out for him. And he looks at me with those dead eyes again, in the sequence of about a second and a half, shits in my hand, bites my thumb, and then jumps into the pine. Little douchebag. And looks at me just pissed off, right? Like he's about to write a really bad review for his Uber driver. Like, how dare you bring me here? And then he curls up in his little toilet paper roll and falls asleep. So Nate, we're all standing there, and Nate's like, man, that is one lucky little Chunk. So now his name is Lucky Chunk. So I'm thinking, all right, we're fine. He's back. It's cool. Sure shooting, Lucky Chunk decides to make this part of his hobby, right? So I end up like the warden at Shawshank going after Hamster Dufresne, who likes to like crawl through all the damn tunnels everywhere. He gets into the vent system like 3 more times. One time gets into this kitchen counter over here where I can hear him underneath the pots and pans under the wood, which I have to take a circular saw and saw out the bottom of the cabinet to get to him. This pink spray to coming back in my face as I've now cut through my little hamster Houdini. Right? Sure, here he is. I lift it up. There he is looking at me like, dude, what took you so long, bro? I've been under this cabinet for like friggin' 8 hours. You know, I got stuff to do. There's a ball I got to roll around in. There's things I got to shit in your hand. Like, I don't have all day. Pick me up and let's move. So suffice to say, I hate this hamster. I despise this hamster. He's an evil little demon hamster with dead eyes. And Nate loves him. He loves this. I catch them as I'm walking by with a load of laundry, like talking to Lucky Chunk, right? Like he's just talking about his day. And I'm pretty sure Chunk is answering him, and they form this relationship. And this series goes on for like a couple years, which in the hamster, I think that he was like 174 years old in hamster years. Like he just kept kicking until one day he just didn't look really well. You know, he was kind of slow, and he had gone from this lustrous black to this sort of peppery gray white, and he didn't look good, and then he sort of shook a little bit, and like we think maybe he had a seizure. And so we're up to about $300 on this hamster between all the ductwork repair, peanut butter to catch the little bastard, woodwork for the cabinets, you know. So now we got a vet bill where we find out that he has liver cancer and he has ascites. And he's not doing well, and it's time to let him go to hamster heaven. And so they take Lucky Chunk and they give him to Nathaniel, and Nathaniel holds him in his hand, and they give him a quick shot in the back of the neck, and I guess that's how you do hamsters. And I'm just sitting there thinking in this moment that Nate is holding this hamster just reverently, and how much he loves him. Was Lucky Chunk a good pet? No, he was awful. He was the worst hamster of all time, and I hated this hamster. He was mean. He cost me a lot of money. He shit in my hands repeatedly. He was not good in any way, but Nate loved him. Like, he connected with this little animal in a way that I have never seen anybody do. Like, they knew each other. And so for Nate, I guess it was more important to be lucky than good. So that's my story.
Yes, 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 yes.
Thank you, Andrew. All right, everyone, we have reached
the crowd goes wild.
The end of Story Slam for the night. I wanted to say thank you to everyone who told the story tonight. You guys are so wonderful. I really appreciate it so much. Okay, it says I'm muted.
You're fine now. You're good.
I'm unmuted. Okay, so I've been trying to say thank you to all the storytellers. You guys are amazing. These are wonderful stories. Thank you to everyone for joining us tonight. It's so great to have over 100 people on this virtual Story Slam. So I'm going to say goodbye. Be safe, be healthy, and we hope to see you all in person, hopefully, next season, starting in September.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Dave.
Nice work. Nice job, Dave. Nice job, crew.
Thank
you, everyone.
you, everyone.
I don't want to be the boss of nobody.
Nice to meet you.
All the stories. This is my first time, but I loved them all.
All day, all night.